They say there was a time when words walked like men, when truth did not hide behind marble pillars or golden temples, but wandered the dusty roads of Galilee with bare feet and tired eyes. He was not what they expected, not the Lion of Judah, roaring from clouds, but the Lamb who touched the leper's face without fear. They called him Rabbi, some called him blasphemer, but the broken ones, they simply called him Hope. It was a cold dawn when the voice was first heard, barely more than a whisper tucked behind the sounds of waves brushing the shore. The fisherman heard it first, not with his ears, but in the ache of his hands. He had cast his net for years, but caught nothing worth keeping. Then the voice said, "Follow me," not as a command, but as a promise. And in that moment something broke, not a net, not a law, something deeper, like a chain snapping around the heart. But he didn't go to the palaces, he went to the alleys. He walked into the places where people forgot how to hope. A woman, caught in her shame, dragged into the square like meat for the wolves. They snarled, "The law says stone her." But he bent down, wrote something in the dust, words only she could read, and then he said it, not with thunder, but with mercy. "Let the one without sin throw the first stone." Silence, then footsteps, then tears. Another night, under olive trees, a man sat alone. He had lost his son to fever, and his faith to silence. The healers failed. The priests offered no answers. He had begun to curse the stars, but then the stranger came not with incense or formula, but with eyes that saw straight through grief. He did not say, "Believe," he said, "Do not be afraid," and that was enough. The stories spread like wind over wheat fields. A widow, who only had one coin left and gave it anyway. A soldier who came with sword but left with peace. A child who offered 5 loaves and became part of a miracle. These were not myths. They were moments etched into the faces of those who lived them. And every word he spoke, it didn't explain suffering. It embraced it, held it like a wounded sparrow, and said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." He spoke of lilies, of birds who never stored grain, yet never went hungry, of children who understood heaven better than kings. He said strange things, dangerous things. Love your enemy. Pray for those who curse you. Turn the other cheek, not because pain is holy, but because love is stronger than revenge. Because mercy wins wars the sword never could. But here's what they don't write in the scrolls. The way he looked at people, he didn't just see sinners or saints, he saw hunger. Real hunger, the kind no bread can touch. And when he said, "I am the bread of life," they didn't just hear metaphor. They felt full. He never built a house, he never wrote a book. But wherever he went, broken things mended. Not always the way people expected. Not always in thunder or fire. Sometimes, it was in a touch, a glance, a silence that said, "I see you." And in that seeing, people were healed. Some say it was illusion. Clever words, but those who met him, they didn't become followers out of fear. They followed because they had tasted truth. And truth was not cold, it was warm. It bled, it wept. It walked beside them. One day, as dust rose behind his feet, a young girl limped from her corner by the gate. She had never spoken, never walked straight. But when she heard his voice, she stood. Her father wept like the day she was born. The town said it was luck. But the mother, she just whispered. He knew her name. Not every prayer was answered the way they wanted. He didn't stop every storm, didn't heal every wound, but somehow, being near him, made the wounds bearable, like pain that finally had meaning, like night that knew dawn was coming. They didn't follow him because life got easier. They followed him because, for the first time, someone made them feel truly seen, not for what they had done, but for who they were still becoming. There was a day when the healer himself was tired. His hands, the ones that lifted the dying and wrote in dust, now trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of the crowd. He had fed 5,000 with a whisper and a prayer, but that day, no one brought bread. They only brought need. The sick, the desperate, the angry, all reaching, all taking. His disciples argued. The Pharisees watched. The wind brought no rest. He looked up to heaven, not to call fire, but simply to breathe. And still, when a mother pushed through the chaos with her child fevered, pale, barely alive, he knelt. The crowd fell silent. He touched the boy's chest and whispered something. No one could hear. The child blinked, the mother collapsed. And Jesus looked like he'd just carried the weight of the sea. But he never turned away, not even when the leper came. Face covered, fingers rotting, a ghost in his own skin. The crowd recoiled, but he stepped forward. "If you are willing," the leper begged, "you can make me clean." And the healer said, "I am willing." No thunder, no chant, just a touch. And decay became flesh again, and the man became a man again. Still, behind every miracle, shadows grew. The temple priests murmured, "Who is this carpenter who forgives sin?" They said, forgiveness, they believed, belonged to heaven, not to hands stained with dust. But Jesus looked at them not with scorn, but sorrow. "Which is easier," he asked, "to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or 'Rise and walk'?" And then the paralyzed man stood, his mat falling like chains behind him. Yet it wasn't the miracles that frightened the rulers. It was the eyes of the people, hungry, but not for food. They had tasted something more eternal than bread, and that scared them. There was a woman bleeding for 12 years. Not just her body, but her hope drained slowly each day. Doctors failed. Her religion ignored her, but she had heard of him. She didn't ask to be seen. She didn't dare speak. She just touched his cloak, just the hem. That was enough. The blood stopped, but more than that, he stopped, turned. Who touched me? The disciples laughed, but he looked into the crowd until their eyes met. Daughter, he said, your faith has healed you. He didn't just heal her body. He gave her back her name. Night after night, he went alone to pray. Sometimes in gardens, sometimes on mountaintops, but always in silence, as if speaking to a father no one else could hear. The disciples once asked, teach us to pray, and he didn't offer formula. He offered fire, our Father, who is in heaven, and for the first time, God no longer sounded far away, but not everyone rejoiced. A storm was rising in the hearts of men. Judas began to count coins, Peter began to doubt, and Jesus began to weep. He once stood before a tomb, tears streaking dust. Lazarus had died. His sisters had begged him to come sooner. He hadn't. 4 days passed. The stench was real, and yet, he wept not for failure but for love. Then, standing before the stone, he cried out with a voice that shook graves, Lazarus, come forth, and death obeyed. People began whispering, could this be the one? But others sharpened their swords, because love, when it threatens power, becomes dangerous, and Jesus knew. He had always known. Still he kept healing, kept teaching, kept loving those no one else saw. A tax collector in a tree, a blind man screaming beside the road, a thief nailed beside him. In the end, he saw them all, spoke to them all. As if time stopped for each soul, he said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And when he said it, people believed not because they were pure but because he saw their purity hidden beneath the dirt. They say he laughed, though few ever mention it, not loud or careless but deep, like thunder hidden in the belly of the earth. He laughed when children ran to him, when old men asked foolish questions, when the disciples fumbled their faith, and every laugh reminded them that heaven wasn't just above it, was near, but the road was narrowing. The whispers turned to plots, the crowds began to shift. Some still clung to hope, others clung to fear, and Jesus, he still walked forward, knowing what waited. He once told them, the Son of Man must suffer many things they didn't understand. Why would the light allow itself to be swallowed? Why would the shepherd walk into the wolves? But he was not a victim, he was a lamb, who chose the altar, not because he was powerless, but because love is most powerful when it bleeds. There comes a night in every life when even the stars seem to turn their faces. For him, that night came in a garden called Gethsemane. The olive trees stood still, their branches heavy with silence. His friends, those who swore they'd never leave, were already asleep. Only the crickets kept watch as the Son of God fell to his knees, his face pressed into the earth he once breathed into being. He whispered a prayer so human, cracked the heavens. If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. And in that moment, he was not the distant Messiah. He was every man who ever trembled before sorrow, every woman who ever begged the night to end, every child who ever cried without knowing why. But then he added, not my will, but yours. And the silence answered with stillness. No voice from the clouds, no angel with a sword, just sweat like blood, and the quiet surrender of divinity. The soldiers came with torches, faces twisted by fear, pretending to be law. Judas kissed him, not with love, but with the greed of 30 coins. Peter, ever the firebrand, drew his blade, and Jesus stopped him. Those who live by the sword, die by the sword. Then, with wrists already bruising under rope, he healed the ear of the man come to arrest him. Dragged through courts built on lies, he stood before priests too afraid to listen. Are you the Son of God? They asked. And he didn't roar. He simply said, I am. 2 words that once split the Red Sea, now spoken like a sigh. The crowd outside chose Barabbas, a murderer, a thief. They didn't just want him dead. They wanted him erased, forgotten, broken, beyond myth. But heaven never panicked. It just waited. They beat him not to punish but to humiliate. The crown they made was not of gold but thorns, pressed deep into the scalp. Blood traced his temples like a king anointed in mockery. The robe, a faded scrap of scarlet, clung to his back, torn raw by lashes. They spat, they jeered, but he looked past them into the centuries, into us. When they led him to the hill, the sun refused to shine, not out of anger but mourning. Nails, split bone and wood. The cross stood like a broken tree planted in a cursed garden, and from that tree, the voice of God spoke the words no God should ever say, my God, why have you forsaken me? But in that cry was more than pain. It was the echo of every soul who ever felt abandoned. He didn't just die for us, he died with us, so that no darkness would ever be truly empty again. And yet, even in agony, he spoke not curses, but commandments. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And in those words, every law became a person. Every rule became a relationship. Every commandment found its beating heart. The crowd watched. Some wept, some mocked, but one thief nailed beside him dared to ask for mercy. Remember me, he gasped. And Jesus, barely breathing, promised paradise before the sun would set. When he finally said, "It is finished," it wasn't a whimper. It was a declaration, a sealing, a cosmic verdict spoken through blood. Love has paid what law never could. The earth shook. Stones cracked. The curtain in the temple, tall as a tower, thick as a man's hand, ripped from top to bottom. The barrier between God and man fell, not with a shout, but with a whisper. And then he breathed his last dot. For 3 days. Silence ruled. Heaven held its breath. The disciples scattered like leaves in wind. Mary wept until her voice gave out. Peter could not forgive his own betrayal. And yet, in the stillness, something ancient stirred, not in temples, not in palaces, but in a borrowed tomb, because death, for all its hunger, could not hold what was never meant to die. It began with a whisper at dawn. While the soldiers slept and the stone still bore the weight of death, something changed. The air trembled, not with thunder, but with anticipation. In that quiet moment, the breath that once hovered over the waters of creation returned, and the tomb that held the body of God cracked open, not by force, but by fulfillment. Mary Magdalene came weeping. She wasn't looking for a risen king. She was looking for a body, a friend, someone to mourn. Her tears blurred the morning light, and when she saw the man standing by the tomb, she thought he was the gardener, until he said her name, Mary. And in that moment, the world changed. She didn't see a ghost. She saw life resurrected, radiant, real. He didn't need to glow. His eyes were enough. Eyes that had wept for Lazarus, eyes that had watched Judas walk away now, eyes that had seen beyond death itself and still held compassion. He didn't rise to rule with an iron scepter. He rose to walk with the broken, to eat with doubters, to let Thomas touch his wounds, not to prove power, but presence. "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed," he said. But he still let them touch, still shared bread, still bore the scars, because the resurrection wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of everything new. He met Peter again, not in judgment, but over coals and fish. "Do you love me?" he asked, 3 times, echoing the rooster's cry that once shattered Peter's pride. And each time, Peter answered, not with perfection, but with pain. And that was enough. "Feed my sheep," Jesus said. Not preach to them, not control them. Feed them, know them, love them. Then, before he ascended, he gave them no riches, no weapons, no empire. He gave them a commandment: go into every nation, every village, every shadowed place, not to conquer but to testify, not with fear but with fire. And he promised, "I am with you always." Not until you fail, not until you doubt always. His word spread like wildfire across the ancient world, and not through armies, through witnesses, fishermen, widows, former enemies, every one of them broken, every one of them beloved. They remembered the stories. He told not just parables, but truths carved into human hearts. The Good Samaritan, who crossed enemy lines for a stranger. The prodigal son, whose return shattered the shame of his rebellion. The shepherd who left 99 for the one. Suddenly, the commandments weren't stone tablets in a desert. They were living flames in the hearts of the faithful. "You shall have no other gods before me," not a demand, but an invitation. "Nothing else will ever love you like I do." "You shall not murder, because every life is an image of the eternal." "You shall not steal, because everything is already grace." "Honor your father and mother, for they carried the story before you." "You shall not bear false witness, because the truth, even when hard, sets you free." Didn't come to erase the law. He came to fulfill it. Not with rules, but with relationship. Not with fear, but with freedom. He taught them that the greatest commandment wasn't hidden in mystery. It was this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he lived it. Even now, his voice echoes not from pulpits or palaces, but in prisons, hospitals, battlefields, and quiet bedrooms where souls cry out. He is there, still kneeling, still whispering names, still saying, "Peace be with you." Some say he was just a man. Others say a myth. But those who've met Jim in bread broken, in burdens lifted, in the stillness between heartbeats, they know, because love like that doesn't stay buried.